Talk Radio 600 WBOB welcomes you to Life Radio, where we ask the experts about everything concerning your home, your health, and your happiness. Life Radio is brought to you by Dr. Dwelvin Simmons of the Orange Park Cancer Center. Call 276-2303 for the Orange Park Cancer Center. Now, here's your host, John Vitas.
Welcome to Life Radio. Good morning. I'm glad you joined us here today. And wow, take a look outside if you haven't been outside yet. Man, you need to. It's a kind of a carbon copy of yesterday. I mean, I forgot that it was August. I mean, what a beautiful day we've got out here. Hopefully the tropical storm Isaac will leave us alone here. I don't know if it's responsible for this weather, but I'll sure take it. We've got a great show in store for you today. It's kind of hard to hype the show a whole lot here because today grief is going to be the subject matter. And speaking of grief, I really would. I think it's necessary that I need to mention that Neil Armstrong passed away yesterday, and what a great American hero. We think about we get up every day and kind of go about our lives and everything, and we put our feet on the ground and think about it. Neil Armstrong, he put his feet on other ground. I mean, that was truly a milestone in American history, and Neil Armstrong truly will be missed. Neil passed away yesterday due to complications from heart surgery, and he will truly be missed. I mean, those are some very important people out there, and as we get older, I think it's time that we start really trying to take a second look at reality here. You know, the United States in particular is, I think, our median age group, if you will, is probably more baby boomers than anything else. And with us baby boomers, that means that we've got parents that are starting to get on up there in age and so forth. And so there's some things that we need to start dealing with because they are unfortunately right around the corner. It's just a reality of life. And then obviously there's times to where we might suffer with grief issues at the sudden loss of a loved one as well. So between our aging parents or so forth due to our population the way it is, and then just things that happen, unexpected accidents, sickness, people contract diseases and so forth. And so I thought that would be a good idea to bring in one of the professionals today when it comes to grieving, and her name is Tracy Riley. Tracy, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. I always love being here with you.
Now, Tracy, tell us a little bit about your background. First off, let's get to know Tracy Riley. Where'd you go to school and all that good stuff?
I started with my bachelor's degree at Auburn University, and then a few years later, I went on to Florida State University and got my master's degree also in social work. And currently, I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Florida.
Now, when you say licensed clinical social worker, could you break that down? What does that mean?
Well, that means that after graduating from my master's program, I spent a few years with clinical supervisors that were helping me become a really great, wonderful social worker. And as a result, I decided to go into private practice. And so I provide counseling for families, individuals, and couples.
Okay, and this counseling, it could be not necessarily grief counseling. This could just be kind of like life counseling or whatever, just different problems that might occur.
Absolutely. It can be helping someone choose what life path they want to go down. It could be helping someone overcome depression. It can also be helping men and women get through a divorce situation, or maybe children who are struggling in school with their grades or their peers. There's a lot of different ways that a counselor can help, and there's a lot of different people that I work with.
And I guess one of the things that you initially do is obviously before you can solve a problem, you have to find out what the problem actually is before you can get to the root of it. So I guess that's part of your process in dealing with probably social issues across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes people aren't really able to define what they consider the problem. They'll come in and they'll start talking about one situation, or they'll start going down a path, and together we may come across or figure out that that's not really the root of the problem, or that's not really their issue. And so I also help people define not necessarily the problem, but what they want to feel like they want to work on or make different in their life.
Now, you also are involved with adoption as well. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. A few years ago, I decided to start an adoption agency to assist families as they were going down the road for adoption. Maybe they, for whatever reason, they couldn't have a biological child or they didn't want to have one. So I started out helping them to go down the path of adoption. And through that process, started working with women who found themselves with a crisis or unwanted pregnancy. And so through that process, I'm able to match women who can't parent and families who can't have a child.
Well, I think it's very interesting what you do, Tracy. You're kind of on both ends of the spectrum. The way I'm looking at it here, it's like, you help people as they have a new life, if you will, in the family, and then you, on the other side of the coin, you also help people at the loss of a life. That's a pretty wide spectrum you got there. What made you decide to get into this field?
John, I'll be honest with you. Growing up in my own dysfunctional family, there were so many problems that I had to overcome as a child. I was actually removed from my parents and my family as a teenager, and I was placed in a state system back in Alabama. And it was a group home for children who were abused and neglected. And so I was able to see from that side of the fence, if you will, what it was like to be mistreated, and then what it was like to be given an opportunity to live in a caring and good environment. So even as an adolescent, I knew that somehow, some way, I wanted to make a difference for other people.
Okay, Tracy, it seems like everyone at some time in their life is going to have grief. They're going to face grief. And there's a lot of people that, I guess, myself probably included, that associate grief and mourning as pretty much the same thing. Is that true?
Well, a lot of people use those words interchangeably, but they're not quite the same. And the way I like to describe it is, if you think of grief as the container, it's kind of like all of our thoughts, our feelings. When someone around us dies, someone that we love is gone, we keep all of our thoughts, our feelings, and our memories contained in this container. Yet the mourning is when we take that grief and we kind of let it outside of the container, and we describe it as our grief gone public. And those examples are talking about the person that died, crying, using art or music, celebrating the anniversaries. When we share our sadness, that is when we actually mourn the loss of our loved one.
Okay, folks, today we've got Tracy Riley in the studio with us. If you'd like to visit her website, it's www.newhopefl.com. You're listening to Life Radio on this beautiful Sunday morning. Stay with us. We will be right back after these short messages.
Divorce. It can often be the source of severe emotional pain. Hi, I'm Tracy Riley, the founder of New Hope Family Services. For over a decade, I've helped hundreds of families deal with feelings of guilt and the lack of self-worth that can often occur in a divorce situation. Let's work together and get you feeling better. Call me today at 704-2527. To learn more about how you can get your happiness back, please visit my website at newhopefl.com or call 704-2527.
Talk Radio 600 WBOB. Now let's return to Life Radio. Brought to you by Dr. Dwelvin Simmons of the Orange Park Cancer Center. Call 276-2303. The Orange Park Cancer Center at 276-2303. Here's your host, John Vitas.
And good morning and welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you here today. Joining me in the studio today is Miss Tracy Riley. She is a grief counselor. And that's one of the things that we're obviously covering here today on the show is the how we deal with the loss of a loved one. And obviously it's a tough subject to deal with, and that's why I brought in the pro, Tracy Riley. So Tracy, once again, I'd like to thank you for joining us here today. And I want to give folks a little bit of a heads up here. Let's talk about that website again. It's www.newhopefl.com, and Tracy's number is 904-704-2527. And if you're basically, what we're talking about here is, sometimes we deal with grief differently. So if sometimes you feel like you just can't seem to get this dealt with and put it on the back burner, I highly suggest you give Tracy Riley a call at 704-2527, or you visit the website at newhopefl.com, and you can probably send her an email from there, I'm sure. And also, if you're having issues, if you're a listener out there today and you're having some grief issues, we can open up the phone lines for you if you'd like. It's 854-1320. Once again, the phone number here is 854-1320. If you've just suffered the loss of a loved one and you feel like maybe you could use a little bit of a little bit of help here, something to maybe ease the pain a little bit, Tracy is here in the studio ready to help you here today. And Tracy, speaking of that, and family and so forth, what happens typically? I mean, I know your family and friends try to help you deal with grief, but what are some of the things that they do? And sometimes it might be a Band-Aid, but is it really enough?
Yeah, that's a really good question, John. A lot of times when people pass away, those that are around us, they mean well, and they'll make comments like, keep your chin up, keep yourself busy. You're young, you could have more children. At least you guys were married for 45 years. Most people don't get that. People mean well, and they say things to try to make us feel better. And what we really need when we're experiencing the loss of someone is just to feel the pain sometimes, which pain by the very nature of the word is difficult. It's a bad situation. It's very instinctive to want to get rid of that pain as soon as possible, but it exists for a reason. It tells us that something needs our attention, and it's very normal to feel like we're in pain after the death of a loved one. And so sometimes our friends and family, they mean well, but we get these buck up messages, and they're really not very helpful.
I take it that this whole mourning thing, it's not. I think what I'm hearing from you here, Tracy, is too many times, and people mean well, like you said, but they're basically kind of saying, well, appreciate what you did have, and quit crying about what you don't have anymore, and so forth. And yeah, there's a certain reality to that, but that's something that I think that you maybe need to start dealing with maybe a month or two or three after the fact, not at the point of the initial loss. I guess it's people have a hard time sometimes fixing their pain, and a lot of times maybe they'll even try to medicate the pain away, and that's not necessarily the way it actually works. So, in maybe a step-by-step example, could you give me some of the things that you do with your clients in terms of the dealing with grief?
Absolutely. One of the things that people like to do, and when they come to see me that I really like, is I like to feel like I'm getting to know the person that died. And I say a lot of times, especially when I meet someone for the first time, tell me about your sister, tell me about your dad, tell me what that person was like and what made your relationship so special and so unique. And I give people the opportunity to just share their story. And for so many people, that's exactly what they need. A lot of times our well-meaning friends and family will say, just don't think about them anymore. Try not to think about them. And we all know that doesn't work. Just this week, I was meeting with a young lady. She's 19 years old, and she lost her father a few months ago. And she shared with me that even at the funeral, one of her aunts came up to her and said, it's going to be okay. There's no need for you to cry.
Yeah,
and how sad, her dad just died, like not even a week prior, and it's okay to cry. And yes, she needs to cry. If you think about people in general, you can really break them into three different groups. There's a third of the people around us, they're neutral. They're not going to hurt us. They're not going to help us. There's a third of the people around us that are going to hurt us in some way. Whether they mean to or not, they're going to hurt us. And then the other third is what I refer to as the therapeutic third, the people that are going to help us as best they can. And so I always recommend that when you're going through a situation like this, figure out which group these people fit into, and if they're the hurting third, then get away from them. And if they're the therapeutic third, then definitely reach out and embrace that friendship.
Now, Tracy, grief is something, obviously, I feel, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm wrong quite often, as you might already know.
Of course.
Grief probably reaches its highest point when when the passing of a loved one initially happens. In other words, at the beginning. And after that, typically it will subside. Sometimes it doesn't. That's obviously when you seek counseling. But does grief ever fully go away?
Well, that's kind of a 2 or 3 prong question there, John. For children, grief continues through the course of their lifespan. Let's say a little girl at 6 or 7 loses her dad unexpectedly. When she's 6 or 7, she may or may not have a full understanding of what that death means for her. As she gets older and she realizes that dad's not going to be at her first prom to take pictures, dad's not going to be at her graduation, and then dad's not going to be there to walk her down the aisle when she gets married, her grief will really continue over the course of her lifetime. I always say grief has a beginning, but it really doesn't have an end. There's no way that you can just wake up one day and go, well, my husband of 45 years is dead and it's been 2 years and I feel great. It's not something that we really ever get over. It's something that we get through. And time will sometimes make it better. But if you think about the holidays and how that can bring up memories of a loved one, or the anniversary of their death or their birthday, or special times that you celebrated together, grief is something that really does continue throughout your life, because death will end someone's life, but death does not end the relationship that you had with that person.
So am I understanding you correctly when you're asked how long should grief last, it's basically, obviously with a child, like you said, that's a different story than maybe someone who just lost someone who has lost a wife or a husband or so forth. So what do you try to tell your, I want to use the word patients, but it's clients in this case, how do you get them to taper down on that grief? What are some of the steps that you use in that process?
Well, everyone's journey is different. And so there are a lot of things that we can do together, but everyone expresses and experiences their grief very unique to themselves, unique to the relationship that they had with the person that died, the circumstances of the death, the people that are surrounding them. So it can be a variety of things, but I always start with someone allowing them to tell their story and help me understand who that person was and what their relationship was like. And then depending on the uniqueness of the situation and how they want to go, I really kind of follow their lead a lot of times. And of course I have ideas and activities and ways to express that mourning, but I always follow the lead of the person that is coming to see me, because it's always so unique to them.
Okay, there's a reading a little bit here where I guess there was a person by the name of Kubler-Ross. So it was kind of saying that grief kind of proceeds in predictable or orderly stages. And I think there was some mention of maybe 4 or 5 stages of that. What are they referring to when they say that?
Actually, I've done a lot of studying on Kubler-Ross, and when she originally wrote that, she wrote the 5 stages of grief, and when she originally wrote that, her thought process was, that is not for those who have experienced a death of someone they love. She wrote that in preparation for your own death. And those are the stages that you would go through as you prepare to face your own death. The truth is, there is no linear pattern that grief will follow. It's not a 5-step process, and then at the end of the 5th step, I'm better, I'm good, I'm great, I'm ready to move on. It's not really like that. Grief can be all over the map, and it's not something that goes in predictable stages or patterns.
Okay, well, and I guess since there's so many different variations of it, a sudden death, a death that happens that you kind of know is coming, and then, then all of a sudden a disease to where you've kind of been, in some cases, we talk about this with cancer patients, they feel like they've just been handed a death sentence, and it takes away their hope, and you, Tracy, seem to give them new hope, and I guess that explains the website, newhopefl.com. I thought I'd segue nicely into that one.
Very
Go get
nice,
them,
John.
Yeah, I'm ready to do a commercial now. And Tracy, we're going to have to go to break here in just a couple of minutes here, but there's going to be some misconceptions about grief that I want us to cover when we come back, and I also want to give one of my sponsors the nod here, if I could, for a second. Dr. Dwelvin Simmons and the great folks over at the Orange Park Cancer Center. They're part of one of the nation's leading radiation oncology practices, and they're part of the Florida Radiation Oncology Group. That's FROG. We like to call them Frog Docs. And as a matter of fact, you can visit frogdocs.com, frogdocs.com, or give them a call at 276-2303. Today in the studio here on Life Radio, we're discussing grief and how we deal with it with counselor Tracy Riley. She is a grief counselor, and her website, once again, is newhopefl.com. She can be called at 704-2527. You are listening to Life Radio right here on Talk Radio 600 WBOB. Stay with us. We'll be back after these short messages.
Talk Radio 600 WBOB. Now let's return to Life Radio. Brought to you by Dr. Dwelvin Simmons of the Orange Park Cancer Center. Call 276-2303. The Orange Park Cancer Center at 276-2303. Here's your host, John Vitas.
And welcome back to the Life Radio show here on this fall-like morning here in August. Man, it's just super out there, and I'm so thankful that I don't have to mow grass. Did it yesterday, so I'm going to just kind of lounge around today. Actually, I don't know why I'm saying that. I'm married, which means I'm sure there's a honey-do list waiting for me at home, and I'll probably be grieving about that.
John, you're going to get yourself in trouble.
Okay, we're talking with Tracy Riley today. She's in the studio, and the subject matter is grief, and I know we kind of chuckle a little bit, but that's just one of the things that we need to learn to do as we suffer through, is grievous a word? Grievous times?
I don't know.
I'll have to look that up.
It
sounds good, through these grievous times that you might be going through. And so, that is one of the things. I mean, obviously, we've got to bring the joy back in our lives and so forth. And Tracy, I know it's got to be challenging for you because this job, I mean, you're seeing a lot of depressed folks, and so my hat's off to you for doing it. There's some jobs out there that I know I can't do, and by golly, that yours is definitely one of them. And there's a lot of misconception about grief. For instance, I read where tears of grief are only a sign of weakness. Can you elaborate on that?
Right. Yeah. People a lot of times think that if you're going to cry about something, that makes you weak, or that maybe you're inadequate to deal with it. And really, the expressing our sadness and crying is a way that our body excretes fluids from our body, just like when we sweat, we're letting out some of the toxins of our body, and tears are kind of the same way. And so we cry, we express our sadness, we let out our feelings and our emotions of missing someone, and it's absolutely natural, it's normal, it's a very healthy way to show our sadness when someone dies.
I've always felt like crying is your first initial, thermometer's at its highest point, time of grief, and it's also the beginning stage of dealing with grief. I mean, I've heard many times where people say, well, I cried about it and I feel a little bit better. It's almost like that's the starting point to recovery. Is that true?
It can be, absolutely. Everyone deals with their grief and their sadness in their own way. And so for some people who don't normally cry, they may cry. Or if they don't normally cry, they may not cry. And so that's the thing about grief, is it's so unique to each individual that what might be normal for one person is not going to work for someone else. And so we need to be basically given permission to grieve our own ways.
And Tracy, let's actually turn this turn the coin over, if you will. One of the things that we hear at a lot of funerals, and some of the things that our friends and family will tell us is he or she is in a better place, that he is in the Lord's hands, he or she is in the Lord's hands, and there are some misconceptions out there, I think, that being upset and openly mourning means you're being weak in your faith. Your response?
Well, when someone dies, we are not grieving where they are. Maybe they are in a better place, if that's your belief process. So we're not grieving where they are. We are grieving where they are not. And that is, they are not with us anymore. And so that is very normal to be sad and to be experiencing that loss. And it doesn't mean that we don't have faith. It means that we're sad. Our mom is dead, our dad has died, and we're sad about that. And yeah, maybe they are in a better place, but like I said, we don't grieve where they are, we grieve where they're not.
What about this, Tracy? It's, we were talking earlier that sometimes, our friends and family do try to, to help us out with our grief and our mourning, and too many times, we hear the same old adage, don't cry over the fact that he's not here, be joyful, about the time that you did spend together, and there is some, that does help in a way, but, sometimes you do need, professional help, obviously, but Is anybody out there that can help you with your grief before you actually have to maybe seek counseling?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the best thing is if someone has a good support group, if they have a good network of friends and family who can be supportive and maybe say or just listen. You know, I have a friend from high school who lost his wife unexpectedly last year, and he tells me all the time, he said, Tracy, you know, I just like it when people will listen. I don't need them to say anything. I don't need them to fix it. I don't need them to tell me that what I'm feeling is wrong. I just like it when they listen to stories about my wife, Amanda. And I like it when I can share things that she said or my favorite memories of her. And so I think so many times we get caught up in trying to fix it and make someone's pain go away. And it's kind of uncomfortable to realize that we can't make someone's pain go away. And I tell people that, you know, I can't fix this. I can't give you a pill. I can't wave my magic wand and make it all better, but I will sit here with you while you hurt. I will support you in any way that I can, and I will walk down this journey with you.
Tracy, another misconception I've read about from time to time is that when grief and mourning are finally reconciled, as if they are, they never come up again. What's the truth or fiction in that?
Well, I think they do come up again, just especially if there's an anniversary or there's a holiday, or like in the case of a child who mom and dad are not there at the wedding or the graduation or the prom. You know, it can come up again. And like I said, grief is not something that you ever get over. It's something that you get through. I was counseling with a lady several months ago, and she said that her adult son, the lady had lost her husband, and the adult son kept saying to her, Mom, why are you still talking to Dad? He's dead. And, she, you know, almost in a way he was trying to shame her or get her to stop because he thought it was not okay. Maybe she was going crazy. And so she came to see me and we talked, and you know, she said something to me that was very profound. She said, you know, I've been talking to him for 40 years. Was I supposed to stop just because he died? Well, no. Like I said, death ends a life, but not a relationship. So I gave her, in a sense, permission to keep talking to her husband, even though he had passed away. And she needed that permission. And she needed to know that that was a way of expressing her grief and mourning the loss of that relationship and the loss of that presence that he had with her.
It also sounds like that was her way of dealing with the grief as well. It's not that she didn't accept it, but she made a very good point. It's just, we've seen this too many times, Tracy, as a married couple that has been together for like 50 or 60 years, you know,
right.
And one of them passes and the other one basically grieves themselves to death as well. It happens right after, you know, very soon after. Is that true?
It can. You know, every situation is unique and different, and it can. I knew the story of a man. He and his wife had been married, I believe, close to 50 years, and they had this little ritual. Every time they would go somewhere in the car, they would get to where they were going. He would put the car in park and turn off the car, and he would turn to her and he would say, "Should we lock the car today?" And she would look at him and go, "You know, I think we should lock the car today." And they got out and they locked the car. And they did this every time they went somewhere for 50 years. And even after she died, when he would get somewhere to park the car, he would instinctually and automatically just turn to her. And then he'd realize she's not there. And so that he continued to experience the loss every single time he went somewhere in the car, even though he was full aware that she was gone.
Right.
And so I think, a lot of patterns, they don't just automatically go away. Our habits don't just change because something out of our control has taken place.
Well, and it's like, we've kind of talked about is when you're with someone that long, you're not with them anymore. You're a part of them or they're a part of you. So it is really hard to deal with that. And obviously it's hard to deal with any loss. I mean, I kind of look at the stages and maybe I've got them incorrectly, but that is kind of, what happens with us in terms of losing a loved one is either A, it'll be due to, age, or B, or a sickness, or C, an accident or something even worse, murder and so forth. So there's different ways to do this. And one thing I think we can get out of this today, Tracy, is if you're grieving and you're grieving heavily and you don't feel like it's subsiding, and you're not really getting the help you need from your family, friends, or even church members possibly, this is when you really should seek the help of a professional. And Tracy, at what point, if people are listening out there, they feel like they might be, right on this brink of, do I need help or don't I? What is something that you can tell our listeners out there that maybe can help them to decide whether or not they need to seek professional help?
I think anyone that wants to choose professional help should reach out. It doesn't matter if it's been a month since a family member has died, or if it's been 8 years since someone has died, or 10 years, or what. There is no time frame. And so I feel like if someone feels like they're struggling, or they're unsure of the journey that they're on, or they just want a little extra support, that they are the expert on them and they should reach out and call. Just a couple of months ago, I met with a lady who, her daughter was murdered unexpectedly about 9 years ago. And she was just coming to counseling for the first time just within the last few weeks. And so we met several times and we had some talks, and I recommended a really good book to her on how to deal with some situation where someone is taken unexpectedly. And so it's been really helpful, and it's been 9 years later.
Well, that is a long time, and I guess that just basically reinforces what you were telling us earlier in the show, is that grief never completely goes away. That it's just something that you just kind of have to deal with, and hopefully you can get it to the point where it subsides. And I think a lot of people deal with grief different ways. They might, take the photo albums and hide everything that had anything to do with that person and so forth. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that with Tracy. It's when we come back, about some of the ways that people kind of feel like they can deal with their grief, and that might not necessarily be the correct way to go here. We're talking to Tracy Riley today, folks, here on the Life Radio Show, and she is keeping us informed here about different ways that we can deal with grief and so forth. And her website is www.newhopefl.com, and her phone number is 704-2527. You're listening to the Life Radio Show. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these short messages.
Divorce. It can often be the source of severe emotional pain. Hi, I'm Tracy Riley, the founder of New Hope Family Services. For over a decade, I've helped hundreds of families deal with feelings of guilt and the lack of self-worth that can often occur in a divorce situation. Let's work together and get you feeling better. Call me today at 704-2527. To learn more about how you can get your happiness back, please visit my website at newhopefl.com or call 704-2527.
Did you know that you're just minutes away from state-of-the-art cancer care? Orange Park Cancer Center is part of FROG, Florida's largest system of outpatient radiation centers. This means you can receive revolutionary cancer treatments which are accurately delivered with less side effects. If you or someone you know is facing cancer, call Dr. Dwelvin Simmons at the Orange Park Cancer Center. Call 276-2303. That's 276-2303. Online at frogdocs.com. Take the next leap forward.
Talk Radio 600 WBOB. Now let's return to Life Radio. Brought to you by Dr. Dwelvin Simmons of the Orange Park Cancer Center. Call 276-2303. The Orange Park Cancer Center at 276-2303. Here's your host, John Vitas.
And good morning and welcome back to the Life Radio Show. We thank you for staying with us today, even though the subject matter is a little bit on the sad side. But, life is full of doors, and unfortunately, as some of the doors we open through, there's darkness on the other side, and just like anything else, we have to learn to deal with it, and that's why I've brought in a specialist in grief counseling, and her name is Tracy Riley. And Tracy, once again, I really would like to thank you for joining us here today and talking about this tough subject, and I also have to kind of take my hat off to you, if you will, for the fact that you were actually able to do what you do out there. I want to talk a little bit about the healing process of grieving, if we can. What are some of the things that you go over with your clients, or what are some of the things that maybe can help someone out there that is currently in the grieving process?
One of the first things that I do with someone when they come in to see me after I have them share with me their relationship and help me get to know the person that has died is I talk to people about the mourning needs. And so there are usually several needs of mourning that I like to go over with people. And some of it, it may sound a little cruel in a sense, but it's definitely part of the healing process, and it's something that really has to be done. And the first thing is that the person sitting next to me has to understand and accept the reality of the death. And so it sounds simple, but at the same time, it is very complicated in a sense, because you can know something in your head, but not know it in your heart. And that's what happens a lot of times when someone dies is we hear what the detective is saying or we hear what the doctor is saying, but we're not really fully able to acknowledge it or understand it because of obviously the severity and the situation of it. So people will move back and forth between protesting it and understanding it. And so I really have to work with people sometimes on just accepting the reality of this death and what it will mean for the future.
I think it's something that's kind of, and it's sad, I guess, way to go into this, but I think what I'm hearing from you, Tracy, it's kind of like when we all remember that bad day, that sad day on September, the 11th in 2001. And as I sat there watching as the second tower was still standing and watched that plane plow into it, and it was like, I couldn't believe it. In other words, I had lying eyes, if you will. So I guess what you're trying to tell us here is the fact that first and foremost, part of the healing process is the acceptance of it all. And acceptance is something that just doesn't happen, at the drop of a hat. It does take time. So I can understand fully what you're saying there is that being part of the healing process. Obviously, grieving is going to be natural, and you're going to probably have to make it, you do have to make a conscious effort to mourn over it, but is that something that is one of the phases of getting over grieving?
Well, I don't like the phrase getting over the grief, because that's not something that we really ever do. We get through it. When we practice our mourning or the grief gone public, where we're sad or we talk about someone that has died, or we find ways to honor them on their birthday or the anniversary of their death or their holiday, that is what I mean when I say that you have to make the conscious effort to mourn that loss. Like I said, and I say a lot of the same things over and over, but it's so important. Death will end a life, but not a relationship. So just because someone has gone and we have to accept the reality that they're no longer with us, that doesn't mean that we forget that person. That doesn't mean that we stop including them in our holidays or anniversaries or things like that.
Tracy, I'm sure there are several ways out there that people try to deal with grief, but they're not correct. What are some of the incorrect ways people try to deal with grief, so forth? Like I've heard things along the lines of people getting rid of the photo albums and so forth. What are some of the mistakes that people that make from time to time when they're trying to deal with the loss of a loved one?
That is definitely something that I have heard a lot about is maybe the first wife dies and the husband gets remarried, and the second wife wants all the pictures gone of the first wife, and that has actually been a situation that I've had to deal with, and I never recommend that. We have to keep remembering the people that have gone before us. Life is meant to be lived forward, but we have to do so while looking backwards. And if someone is gone and they were a part of our life, then we do need to remember them, and we need to be able to be comfortable around the people that we're with to express that. And so I talked to this young couple who were newly married, and he had lost his first wife several years before. And so I talked about how it's okay to have a picture of her up in the living room or somewhere where he can see it to remember the times that he had with her. So it's very important to keep that person, to keep pictures out, and we talked about this in December, to put a stocking up for that person that has died, or to find a way to honor them on their birthday or the anniversary of the death. To know that those times may be difficult, but they're necessary.
Tracy, if there's someone out there listening today that's suffering from the loss of a loved one as we're closing up the show here, is there something that maybe you could tell our listeners that maybe didn't feel comfortable from calling in? What are some of the things that maybe can help them deal with this? I mean, obviously we've covered a lot of the issues here, but can you kind of give a summation as to what they should be thinking about and maybe some of the things they should try or do?
I think it's always important to give yourself permission to know that you're going to feel sad. And one of the things that I tell people on a regular basis is to embrace the sadness. Let yourself feel the pain of your loss. Don't try to push it away. Don't try to ignore it. Don't try to replace it with busy work or drugs or alcohol or overeating or too much shopping. There's only so much that you can do before that pain is going to surface, and it's going to be that much worse if you just don't deal with it. If you go ahead and embrace the pain, almost as if it's your friend, befriend it in a way that makes you not afraid of it, that will go a long way in starting the healing process.
I think it might even be helpful to, and we hear this a lot, so-and-so would have wanted it that way or so forth. And that really kind of carries a lot more weight than maybe people kind of give it credit for. I lost a good friend of mine, and one of the things that we did a lot was we worked on motorcycles together. And sometimes I might be looking at an issue and say, okay, how would Steve handle that? And so it is kind of nice to relate. It's almost like when I tell, my son before he goes out on the town, if you will, I said, just imagine me sitting in that back seat of that car while you're driving down the road. If you keep that in mind, you should be in good shape. But it's something that you brought up. Something interesting is I've heard stories. There's a lot of people out there, elderly folks that are quite happy with the fact that they know they're fixing to pass, and some of them will even go so far as to start putting little notations on certain personal items of theirs, saying, okay, I want so and so to have this,
right,
and so and so to have that. And a lot of times the children, they're not wanting to accept this reality and so forth, so it's very hard for them. So is there something that we can do to prepare ourselves for what we all know, and that is the inevitable? I mean, we are going to lose, a parent. We're going to lose both of our parents eventually because obviously, no one lives forever. So what can we do maybe to prep ourselves a little bit so when that unfortunate time does come, our level of grief maybe is a little bit lower?
Well, I'm not sure that we can ever anticipate that our grief is going to be lower, but I think accepting the reality of the situation is going to be first and foremost what we would need to do. Accept the reality that this is going to have to be dealt with, and sometimes it's easier to deal with things in a proactive way as opposed to a reactive way. And, something you said a minute ago, guilt. Guilt is the gift that keeps on giving. And so if someone dies and some well-meaning person comes to you and says, well, he would have liked it if you would just do this, then that can create a sense of guilt in our lives that says, well, I'm crying and my husband wouldn't want me to cry. So now I feel guilty for doing what comes naturally. And so it can just become a spiral over and over and over. And grief a lot of times is a spiral. If you've ever looked at one, they kind of just go in circles and circles with no ending and no beginning.
Yeah, I always say the mind is kind of like a car. It's you can put it in drive, you can put it in reverse, you can turn right, you can turn left, and we always seem to be going through these little inner battles with ourselves, and we really just need to get pointed in the right direction. And obviously, it's easier said than done. But grief is something we have to deal with from time to time. And Tracy, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show here today and joining us here on Life Radio and giving us a little bit of insight about what it is you do and some of the ways that we deal with grief. And I wanted to lead people to the website once again, if I may. It's www.newhopefl.com. Her name's Tracy Riley, and she's been gracious enough to come on today with us and join us on the Life Radio show. And we want to thank you once again for that, Tracy.
You're welcome. I'm here anytime.
All right, folks, that's just about a wrap here on the Life Radio show here on this beautiful Sunday morning. Hey, make sure you get out and enjoy life today. What a beautiful August day to get out and enjoy yourselves. And we will see you next Sunday right here on the Life Radio show. Have a great weekend, everybody.